The most beautiful girl in school had run through that torrential rain and ended up at my doorstep, solely so she could stay at my house for the night, but I turned her away. The very next day, she was brutally murdered in my alley. From that day on, I lived in perpetual regret. After joining the police academy, I searched for that killer like a madman. However, that rain had washed away all the clues. For 10 whole years, I didn't find a single lead. But then, a bolt of lightning from the sky brought me right back to that same crossroads of fate. The very first thing I did upon returning to my high school days was run toward the door. As soon as I opened it, Sarah was standing there. "Mark, I heard your parents are away on business and you're home alone. Can I stay at your place for a few days? I'll do all the housework in return." I looked at the girl standing before me, and my hands instinctively reached out to touch her. Sarah tried to shrink back in panic, but she needed my help, so she stopped herself. When my fingers brushed against her, her skin was freezing cold. The slight trembling of her body clearly told me that she was still alive, and that I had truly returned to my past. "Sorry," Sarah said, stepping back nervously. But her foot slipped, and she began to fall backward. I quickly caught her by the waist and pulled her into my arms. Amid the roaring sound of the heavy rain, a strange silence fell between us. She was so terrified in my arms that she didn't even dare to move. I immediately withdrew my hands and stepped slightly away from the light. "You were shivering from the cold. I only did that to give you some warmth. I am sorry," Sarah said softly. "It's okay." I stepped aside to let her in. The color had completely drained from her face. Looking at her, my old memories began rushing through my mind. In my past life, the killer had vanished forever after committing the murder in this town. But this time, I wouldn't just save her. I would use my years of police experience to track down the killer tonight. Sarah stood nervously in the entryway, pulling at the corner of her shirt. When I turned to get her slippers, she grew even more anxious. "My socks are wet. Your slippers will get dirty. I'll just come inside barefoot and wipe the floor later." Being alone in a house with a boy on this stormy night made her feel incredibly unsafe. As soon as I turned around, her eyes darted quickly across the house. Her posture relaxed slightly, only when she noticed the hot tea and scattered containers on the table. Handing her a towel, I said, "If you don't mind, dry your hair first," she asked hesitantly. "Could you give me some clothes to wear? Mine are quite wet." Only then did I notice how tightly she was clutching her soaked shirt. I said, "Since you need to change anyway, why don't you take a hot bath? Otherwise, you'll catch a cold and fall sick. The guest room doesn't have a bathtub, so use the bathroom in my room. I'll turn on the hot water." Hearing about bathing in my bathroom, Sarah blushed crimson and gave a very soft, "Okay." The sound of running water echoed from the bathroom. Seeing me occupied, Sarah finally gathered the courage to speak. "Mark," I cut her off, saying, "You can just call me by my name. You probably want to ask why I didn't question your reason for staying here, right?" Sarah raised her head in surprise, nodding with wide eyes. I said, "If a beautiful girl like you is knocking on someone's door for help in such heavy rain, there must certainly be a compelling reason. If you aren't comfortable talking about it, it's not right for me to keep asking." Hearing this, Sarah's eyes welled with tears. After setting the water temperature, I stood up and walked slowly toward her. I suddenly pinned my hand against the wall near her ear, trapping her in my space. "I don't care what your intentions are, but aren't you afraid that if you stay here, I might do something wrong to you?" Pressed against the wall, Sarah bit her lip. She felt a strange warmth rising inside her. She looked into my eyes with great courage and said, "I trust you." That single response left me with no reason to test her further. I smiled and removed my hand. "Go take a bath, and as for your clothes, based on your height, my oversized hoodie will fit you like a dress. Make do with that for now. Your clothes will dry very quickly in the dryer after being washed." Sarah took a breath of relief and said, "Thank you." She turned and went into the bathroom. Half of that thank you was for sheltering her, and the other half was for understanding and supporting her. Listening to the sound of water from the bathroom, I walked out of the bedroom and went to the kitchen to make ginger tea for her. A little later, the bathroom door opened, and Sarah emerged wearing my oversized hoodie. The steam from the hot water had turned her cheeks a faint pink, and her fair skin above her knees caught the light. I said, "I've left the slippers here for you." When Sarah put on those warm, furry slippers, much of her hesitation melted away. Stepping out of the bedroom, she was greeted by the sweet aroma of honey and ginger tea. I walked up to her with the mug. My eyes caught the wide neckline of her hoodie, and I paused for a moment. I extended the mug toward her and said, "Here, have some ginger tea." Sarah took the mug and began sipping it in small gulps. I asked, "Should I make some noodles for you?" She replied, "Won't that be a trouble for you?" "How is it a trouble? It's just a matter of a few minutes. Sit down. I'll fry 2 eggs for you too." Just as I was about to stand up, she caught my hand. I know how to fry eggs. I'll help too. Once in the kitchen, Sarah was amazed by my chopping speed. The tomatoes and ham were perfectly sliced on the chopping board. Sarah climbed onto a small stool and stood on her tiptoes to reach the egg carton from the top shelf. As she did, her large hoodie slid up slightly. The moment my eyes darted there, my face flushed with embarrassment. Sarah seemed to notice my gaze too, and she hurriedly pulled the hoodie down. However, she lost her balance on the stool. I rushed to catch her from behind, but my hand accidentally landed where it shouldn't have. Her body instantly went limp, and she fell straight into my arms. The scent of my cologne blended with her citrus body wash. Both of us stood there completely paralyzed. The silence broke only when the boiling soup began to splatter out. I immediately withdrew my hands, stepped back, and handed her a spoon. You stir this. I'll take out the eggs. Turning around, I saw in the mirror that my ears were entirely red. So, it wasn't that I lacked interest in girls all these years. It was simply that no one else had ever made me feel this way. Sarah, too, was stirring the noodles with a flushed face and a lowered head. The sizzling of the oil largely muffled the sound of our racing hearts. The aroma of the soup filled the entire kitchen. I placed the noodles on the table, intentionally avoiding touching her trembling fingers. Careful, it's very hot. Put on whatever channel you want to watch. As soon as the TV turned on, Sarah gripped her chopsticks tightly. An adult video, the one I had forgotten to turn off earlier, was playing on the screen. The scene was quite intense. To hide my embarrassment, I coughed slightly and immediately navigated the menu to put on Crayon Shin-chan. I had completely forgotten that in my past life, I used to turn her away out of this very fear that she might see all this. Fortunately, my years of police experience had made me somewhat thick-skinned. Without changing my expression, I reacted as if nothing had happened. Sarah also changed the topic instantly. I didn't know you were such a good cook. I gently wiped the beads of sweat from her nose with the tissue paper. You're sweating, right? That means the cold is leaving your body. Eat comfortably. There's more in the pot. She ate the noodles with absolute focus. She cleared the entire bowl, including the soup, and a strange sense of peace settled on her face. Did one bowl fill you up? She nodded. Just as she did, a loud bolt of lightning crackled outside. I immediately checked my watch. It was 9:57 p.m. There were only 30 minutes left until the time of the murder in my past life. This time, I would see the killer's real face. Time was running out. I decided to head near the crime scene immediately. I handed her a glass of water and a blanket to wrap herself in. Since you've eaten, watch TV in the living room. I'll wash the dishes when I get back. I'm going out to grab some snacks. I'll be right back, Sarah asked in surprise. You're going out in this heavy rain? It's fine. The store is close by. Reaching the door, I suddenly stopped and turned around. I feared that the killer might have planned this in advance or followed Sarah here. Remember, until I return, do not open the door for anyone, even if they ring the bell. I have my keys. I won't ring the bell. Hearing my words, Sarah nodded like an obedient kitten and wrapped herself snugly in the blanket. As soon as the door closed, she curled up on the sofa in that empty room, quietly waiting for my return. I opened my black umbrella and stepped out into the rain. I checked the time on my waterproof watch. It was 9:58 p.m. According to the past forensic report, Sarah's time of death was around 10:30 p.m. Tonight, my target was the 24-hour convenience store that lay along her usual path. In my past life, Sarah had bought an umbrella from that store and grabbed a bite before heading toward the alley where she was murdered. Although she was safe at my house tonight, I had to confirm if the timeline would try to correct itself. Would someone else die in her place? I couldn't let that happen. On the way, I pulled out my phone and checked the home security camera. On the screen, Sarah was sitting on the sofa with her knees bent, watching TV. Assured that she was safely at home and hadn't gone anywhere, I quickened my pace. As I neared the convenience store, I heard someone groaning. A frail boy was curled up near a dumpster at the corner of the alley. A few thugs were surrounding him, kicking and punching him, demandingly asking what he was hiding in his hand. The boy on the ground tightly held a light brown handkerchief, and an iron box lay dropped beside him. I recognized him at a glance. It was Tommy, the quietest boy in my class, whom everyone bullied. Hearing my voice, the thugs turned around, and their faces went pale. My parents held significant influence in this town, so these thugs were always terrified of me. I didn't even lower my umbrella, and they fled as if they had seen a ghost. Now, the only sound echoing in the alley was the rain pattering against the tin can. I leaned down and held the umbrella over Tommy's head. Are you okay? Should I take you to the hospital? The burn scar from 3 months ago was still clearly visible on his wrist. I reached out to help him up, but he pulled his hand back as if shocked by an electric current. The iron box struck the wall, spilling some crayons and a half-empty packet of cat food into the mud. You came out in this heavy rain just to feed stray cats? Tommy merely gave a slight nod and suddenly broke into a violent fit of coughing. His frail shoulders shook in the rain. I took off my jacket and tossed it to him. Wear this. Is your mother out of town again? If you fall sick, who will take care of your little brother? Just then, the The past CCTV footage flashed in my mind. In my past life, Sarah had seen something outside the convenience store that drew her into this alley. Looking at Tommy, everything clicked. Sarah must have seen Tommy being beaten by these thugs. If Sarah had stepped out of the convenience store to stop the bullying that night, the thugs' attention would have shifted from Tommy to her, because she was completely drenched. I tried to recall how Tommy looked on Monday in my past life. His injuries back then were far deeper than they were today. Yet he had shown no significant reaction to Sarah's death. This meant that in my past life, Tommy must have risked his life to hold off the thugs so Sarah could escape. If the thugs didn't murder Sarah, then the real killer was someone else. Thinking further, I found the most crucial clue, the killer's weapon. Whoever was walking around with a lethal knife on this stormy night would be the prime suspect. Realizing those three thugs might have a knife, I deeply regretted letting them escape. As for the badly injured Tommy, he had survived until graduation in my past life, so I had to leave him here for now. If you're okay, go home quickly. I had just turned around when I noticed Tommy's broken umbrella. I thrust my black umbrella into his hand. Your umbrella is broken. Take mine. I have some work, so I can't drop you home. Be careful and get home quickly. Before Tommy could refuse, I had already run off into the heavy rain, vanishing from sight. The rain was so heavy that those three thugs couldn't have gone far. They were sheltering under a shed, waiting for the rain to stop. They were cursing me, planning how to throw a sack over my head and beat me up. Yet, they were also afraid of my background. While they were trapped in this dilemma, I dashed right in front of them. All three thugs looked utterly terrified upon seeing me. Thinking I had come to demand money, they backed away with waving hands. Hello, friends, I need to borrow something. The three exchanged glances of suspicion and defensiveness. Not money, something else. I looked into their eyes and gave a very innocent smile. I need to borrow a knife. The three thugs stood frozen. Clearly, they didn't understand my words. You guys are street thugs, and you don't even carry a knife while roaming outside? My taunt worked. One of the green-haired thugs angrily pulled a butterfly knife from his pocket and began flipping it around like a circus trick. I took one look and knew it couldn't be the knife mentioned in the forensic report. That's way too fancy. I'll give you $100 if you give me a knife like a fruit knife. Hearing that amount of money, the other two thugs began rummaging through their pockets. One pulled out a multi-purpose Swiss Army knife and the other a gleaming folding hunting knife. Neither was the knife. The knives are good, but forget it. Ignoring the thugs' curses, as they thought I was mocking them, I turned without a word and ran back into the cold rain. None of these three thugs possessed the weapon. This lead ended here. A strange restlessness grew in my chest. Truthfully, the easiest way to solve this case would have been to deny Sarah shelter and quietly tail her. That way, I could have caught the killer red-handed. But seeing her safe and sound before me in this new life, I couldn't control my emotions. I would rather choose this difficult path of finding a needle in a haystack than put her life in even a shred of danger. I went back into the convenience store to buy some groceries. A kind employee handed me a clean towel to wipe the water from my head. I thanked him, dried off, put my phone inside a waterproof pouch, and set out again into the raging storm, retracing Sarah's exact steps from my past life. I headed toward that ill-fated spot where the murder had occurred. Stepping outside, the fierce wind tried to turn my umbrella inside out. Stepping over mud and broken glass, I finally reached the CCTV camera's blind spot. This very spot was repeatedly mentioned in the forensic report. My waterproof watch gleamed. The time was 10:17 p.m. Suddenly, a violent gust of wind blew, and my umbrella flipped. I left the umbrella there and let the freezing rain pour over me. My phone vibrated inside the waterproof pouch. Leaning against that wet brick wall, I checked the home camera. In that faint yellow light, Sarah was curled up in the corner of the sofa. Her legs moved restlessly, and her eyes were fixed continuously on the door. Her face showed both fear and clear anxiety for me. It was now 10:38 p.m. Suddenly, the sound of metal clanging came from the far end of the alley. I immediately went on alert and crept toward it. However, I encountered a familiar face there. Ryan, our school's notorious troublemaker. At this moment, he was sitting under a tin shed, peeling an apple with a fruit knife. Ryan was lifting withered apples from a plastic bag with the tip of his knife. I knew his thug persona was just an act. He came from a very poor family, and his mother had dementia or some severe illness. His shoes had anti-slip plaster used on hospital floors, and his clothes smelled of ICU-grade antiseptic, but my entire focus was on the fruit knife in his hand. The design and size of that knife perfectly matched the description in Sarah's murder case file. "What are you doing in the rain? Come along quickly. My house is nearby. I'll give you an umbrella." Just as I reached the shed, Ryan's phone rang loudly. A nurse spoke in a panicked voice on the phone, saying his mother's oxygen level had suddenly dropped. The color drained from Ryan's face. The knife fell from his hand into the water with a splash. Without a word, he dashed into the rain like a madman. I leaned down and picked up the knife from the mud. Feeling its cold touch, I examined it closely. Now I was absolutely certain. This was the time. This was the place. And the size of the knife was absolutely perfect. This was the very weapon used to murder Sarah in my past life. If Ryan had accidentally dropped this knife, then surely the real killer would pass by within the next half hour and pick it up. I took a deep breath and threw the knife back into the exact same spot. Utilizing my old detective experience, I hid in the darkness behind and waited. The rain grew even heavier. At 10:45 p.m., a heavily intoxicated man staggered under the shed. He kicked a can lying there, and his mud-stained shoe stepped on the knife's handle, plunging the blade deeper into the mud. Then he walked away, clutching his half-empty bottle. At 10:47 p.m., a delivery boy slammed his bicycle brakes, but he skidded and fell over the knife. He got up, cursing, and angrily kicked the knife toward the gutter. The knife was now completely hidden in the mud and dirty water. It was now 10:55 p.m. It was impossible for anyone to accidentally find that mud-covered knife. Only a few minutes remained until the estimated time of Sarah's death. Just then, a silhouette wearing a black raincoat and a mask entered the alley. He was walking slightly hunched. He walked straight toward the mud-covered knife and leaned down. Every nerve in my body tensed up. As he grabbed the knife's handle, his hand emerged from the raincoat sleeve. His wrist bore a very distinct acid burn scar. I immediately stepped out of the darkness and clearly saw the face inside the raincoat under the dim light. It was none other than Mr. Davis, our school's most polite and respected chemistry teacher. A storm erupted inside me. 3 months ago, his own hand had been burned by acid while trying to save fighting students in the lab. Even after that accident, he had guided those children with great affection. He was known as a devoted husband who listened to his wife, and everyone respected him. But if he was the killer, then all the missing links from my past life connected perfectly. In my past life, Sarah was attacked in that dark alley, but there was no sign of flight or struggle. This was because she, too, would have placed complete trust in this gentle teacher. If Mr. Davis had offered her his raincoat and said he would take her to his house to keep her safe with his wife, Sarah wouldn't have suspected him at all on that stormy and terrifying night. My heart filled with pain thinking about all this, but I couldn't take any hasty steps. After all, the Mr. Davis of this timeline hadn't committed any crime yet. I decided to use my police training to find out what he was doing out so late. Mr. Davis, hearing my voice, he looked up. Seeing me completely drenched, surprise and concern flashed across his face. "Mark, what are you doing here in this state? Did you get stuck in the rain?" "Sir, why are you out in the rain so late?" I asked, watching his facial expressions closely. I saw a momentary hesitation in his eyes. "Nothing. Just came out to get a pack of cigarettes." He was lying. Mr. Davis never smoked. The entire school knew that. "My raincoat is quite large. Come inside it. I'll take you to my house. From there, you can wear this raincoat and head home." He spoke very affectionately, as always. I simply nodded and stepped under his raincoat. Walking together, I noticed his eyes dart toward a nearby condom vending machine, and he immediately grabbed my shoulder to steer me forward. I walked alongside him like a living corpse. Reaching his doorstep, Mr. Davis suddenly pulled out his phone, typed a message, and quickly shoved it back into his pocket. I forgot to bring my keys. Hold on a moment, but I had clearly felt the ring of keys hanging from his belt. This was his second lie tonight. My suspicion deepened further. A few moments later, the door opened. It was opened by his wife, Stella, who also taught chemistry at our school. She was wearing a silk nightgown with a loose belt, and her face was slightly flushed. In the dim light of the entryway, I clearly saw a half-empty bottle of wine on the living room table, burning scented candles, and rose petals scattered all around. The air was filled with a romantic ambiance. At that exact moment, the light bulbs went off in my brain, and all the clues aligned in a straight line. Mr. Davis was supposed to spend a romantic evening with his wife tonight, but perhaps they had run out of condoms, which is why he went out in the rain. True to his helpful nature, he must have cleared some debris stuck in the gutter along the way, and that's when he stumbled upon the knife. Seeing me, he must have felt embarrassed to buy supplies from the vending machine, and leaving me alone wouldn't have felt right to him, so he brought me home with him and pretended not to have his keys while texting. He was simply giving his wife time to change her clothes. His every bizarre behavior was now entirely explained. I took a towel from Stella and began drying my hair. But the suspicion in my mind had now turned into a massive question. If he is truly a good man and his wife was lovingly waiting for his return at home, would such a person leave a student to die on the road? Let alone murder her. Stella's attention turned to the dirty knife in Mr. Davis's hand. Found it near the gutter. It had a lot of debris stuck in it. Then I ran into Mark and completely forgot to throw it away. Saying this, Mr. Davis was about to toss it into the dustbin when something felt off to me. "Just a minute, sir. May I see that knife?" Slightly confused, Mr. Davis turned the knife around and handed it to me handle first, very comfortably. This small action proved once again how gentle he was inside. I examined the fruit knife very carefully, and I was shocked. Because it was dark outside, I hadn't noticed earlier, but there was a slight dent on the blade of this knife. Obviously, Ryan had cut something very hard with it. The forensic report never mentioned any such dent in Sarah's wounds. If a murder were committed with such a knife, the wound would look completely different. This meant that the real weapon wasn't this knife at all. I was chasing the entirely wrong person. I checked my watch in a panic. It was 11 p.m. The real killer might have just stepped out. In my anxiety, I thrust the towel into Stella's hands. "Sorry, sir, I'm running very late. I must go home immediately. I'm taking your raincoat." I handed the knife back to Mr. Davis, put on his raincoat, and plunged back into that dreadful storm. I ran back to the crime scene. I made several rounds around the area. A pedestrian or two passed by, but none looked like someone who would stop midway to murder someone. It was 11:30 p.m. The streets were entirely deserted. I pulled out my phone and checked the home camera. Sarah was curled up on the sofa, incredibly drowsy, her head dropping repeatedly. Yet, she was trying her best to stay awake. She kept looking toward the door, waiting for me. I clenched my fists and threw off the raincoat. I wandered around that dense darkness near the spot. 12 a.m. arrived, but I didn't see a single suspicious person. A deep helplessness and dread settled within me. Did I really miss it? If I don't find the killer, how will I ever erase the injustice done to Sarah in my past life? I lifted my head toward the sky and let the heavy rain pour onto my face. My resolve grew even stronger. Suddenly, my phone vibrated. I opened the camera immediately. On the screen, despite being asleep, Sarah walked up to the door out of fear of being alone and began looking around anxiously. Startled by a sudden noise, she looked fearfully toward the camera. I looked toward the camera, gave a gentle smile, and promised that I was on my way. After that, she took her exhausted body back to the sofa and curled up in the blanket. A deep sense of peace was now visible on her face. The new suspect. Looking at the empty street, I stood in the rain, letting the cold water pour over me. This was an old habit of mine. Cold water helped my brain process things faster. I began reviewing every person I had encountered tonight. The store clerk, Tommy, those 3 thugs, Mr. Davis. I forcibly placed everyone on the suspect list. Tommy. When the thugs turned his bag upside down, not a single penny fell out, let alone a weapon. He was off the list. The 3 thugs. They could have a motive, but their knives were completely different. They were off the list too, the drunkard and the delivery boy. They only kicked the knife accidentally, and besides, that wasn't even the real weapon. When every impossible person was eliminated from the list, the needle of my suspicion stopped on a person I hadn't even considered in my wildest dreams. Ryan. Ryan had dashed toward the hospital upon hearing about his mother's worsening condition, and his knife had dropped right there. But what if his mother's condition stabilized quickly? Half an hour was more than enough time to return from the hospital. What if, upon returning, he realized his knife was lost and bought a new one from a nearby shop? The police file did state that someone had hastily purchased a fruit knife between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. that night, and his return time perfectly aligned with the window when I wasn't at the scene. Connecting all these dots, my suspicion of Ryan intensified heavily. Testing this theory was simple. I just had to go to Ryan's house right now and knock on his door. If he was already home and had indeed bought a new knife, his guilt would be certain. Guided by my memory, I reached his house. My heart sank. The lights inside his house were on. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. The door opened. Ryan stood there shirtless, a towel over his head. "Hey, Mark, what are you doing here? You didn't go home so late? And whose raincoat is that?" I stepped inside the house, and my eyes locked straight onto a brand new fruit knife resting on the table. The mysterious person recorded in the police file who had bought a knife in the rain so late at night was indeed Ryan. "Mr. Davis gave it to me," I replied, pointing to the raincoat. "Did you just get back?" "Yeah, man. Mom's health suddenly worsened. In that rush, I completely forgot to give you an umbrella. But what are you doing out so late?" "Nothing. Just felt like walking in the rain. By the way, when you ran, your knife fell. Why did you buy this new one?" "Oh my God. I was wondering why the knife wasn't in my pocket. Where did it fall?" "Mr. Davis found it. He threw it in the dustbin." "Oh, well, whatever. Anyway, I had used that knife to cut wood, so it was slightly bent. I bought this new one on my way back." He laughed casually, but darkness enveloped my mind. His return time and the time of the murder matched perfectly, and he had truly bought a new knife identical to the murder weapon. It was impossible to remove him from the suspect list. I decided to test him directly. "Ryan, we're friends, right? Is that even a question? We're brothers for life, man. Is there a problem? Tell me." Looking at his friendly demeanor, I stared straight into his eyes. "I don't want to see you going to jail someday for committing a crime. Think about the consequences before doing anything. Your mother needs you. Don't do anything illegal." Ryan was stunned. He completely misunderstood my words. He assumed I had found out about his secret plan to sell counterfeit cigarettes at school. Instead of getting angry, he became deeply emotional that I had come all this way through such heavy rain just to show him the right path. "Don't you worry, brother. Others might not know, but you know what kind of guy I am. I won't do anything wrong." I felt my job was done, so I left his house. Little did I know that because of my warning, He dropped his plan to sell counterfeit cigarettes forever. As I walked back into the rain, he thumped his chest behind my back and swore to consider me his true brother for the rest of his life. I walked away from Ryan's house with a whirlwind of complex emotions. I took Mr. Davis's raincoat and quietly left it outside his house. Hearing sounds from inside that would make anyone blush, I didn't disturb them. Drenched in the rain, I walked toward my home. But the burden on my heart was significantly lighter now. If Ryan was indeed the killer, at least he was currently at a stage where he could be steered onto the right path, and the evil inside him could be eradicated. I had met so many people tonight, and for now, there was no bigger suspect than Ryan.